Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at including stuff in JSP files. So we're going to see how you can include other files or even other JSP files in your JSP file. So for example, if you've got a header or a footer or anything else that you want to reuse in multiple files, we're going to see how to do that here. So let's create a new JSP file here to demo this with. So I'm going to say new JSP and let's call it including or includes.jsp. So JSP, there we go. Click finish. And let's suppose that I've got a copyright that I want to include. So I'll right click here and I'll go to new file and let's call this copyright.text. Click finish and say copyright caveofprogramming.com. Now there's two ways you can include other stuff in JSP files, and which one you use depends on exactly what you need. If you've got a file that doesn't change very often, you probably want the include directive. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to say percent, and then you see there's an example of a page directive up here, and directives start with this percent at sign. So I'm going to have a percent at sign, and then it's an include directive, so I'm going to say include, and then I need to give it a file to include, so I'll say file equals copyright.text. And what the include directive does is it includes a file at the point where the servlet or the JSP is translated into first into a servlet and then into an actual class file. So you don't want that to happen very often because you don't want to force your application server to have to recompile your page. So if you've got content that doesn't change often, like maybe I'm only going to change this copyright every month or every year or something, then you can use this include directive, and you can think of this as a static include. It includes stuff directly and literally into your page before it's compiled and before it's sent to the browser. So if I run this now, then we're going to see this here. Now there's another include mechanism which you can think of as a dynamic include, and that's suitable for stuff that does change often. So let's take an example here. Let's have a new file here, and let's call this updates.text, and let's say today's weather is sunny. So imagine this is going to change like on a daily basis, or maybe even minute to minute, who knows. Then I don't want to use a include directive for that, because every time that file changes, in order to redisplay it, my application server is going to have to recompile my JSP, and I don't want that to happen. So for that, let's just put a comment here. I'll use an HTML style comment, which is like this, and I'll say static include, and then let's have something here that says dynamic include, and I'll say content changes a lot. So static include, in fact let's not use dashes in it, so I'm not sure if that will work. Probably will actually, but I'll say static include content changes infrequently. So now a dynamic include is something you do with a JSP tag like this. You say JSP include. Now we're not going to include a file here, we're going to include a page. And the difference is that if you include a file, I'll just close the tag there, you're going to, as I say, you're going to include it before the servlet's actually compiled, before the JSP is compiled. But with a JSP include tag, what's going to happen is when your JSP is served up, it's actually going to go back to the server and separately serve up this, whatever I put in here, and then send that separately to the browser, but include it in the right place in the page. So for this, you're going to have an extra request from your browser to your server, but you need this. That's a lot better than having to recompile your JSP if your content changes a lot. So let's say here, include page, and I'm going to include where was it? Updates.txt. So imagine updates.txt is something that changes frequently. Now if I run that here, and let's just put a paragraph here to separate this out. So P, actually I want to have a self-contained tag like this. So there we go, that's just a line break. And if I run this now, you can see basically it looks the same in the browser. Here we've got today's weather is sunny, but this was included before the JSP was compiled, and this was a separate request to the app server, basically to Tomcat. Now that's a rule of thumb as to when to use each one, but there are other times when you've absolutely got to use a static include. So both of these can include JSP pages, but let's create a JSP here, in fact a fragment of a JSP, because remember these are going to be included literally in your page, so you don't want to have like HTML tags in it and stuff. You just want a fragment of something that's going to be included in the page. So let's create another fragment here. Let's create a JSP, and let's say let's call this variables.jsp. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of all this stuff here, because I don't want to be including a full page, and I'm going to just have a scriptlet tag here. Let's close this scriptlet tag, sent, and a closing tag. And here I'm going to define like a variable or two. In fact, I'll just have one to be going on with. Let's say string name equals Sue. Now, if let's say I might have a bunch of, I don't know, predefined stuff here, or this might be a load of Java code. It could be a whole load of Java code that I want to include for some reason in my page here. Now, I can't. That's if I use a JSP include, then I won't be able to access those variables. Because in order to access them, I need to include the variables literally here as if they were typed, you know, at this point or at some other point in a page. So let's look at that. Let's use let's have a comment here actually and say must use static include if it's got Java code that in it that we want to access. So here I could say sent and then have an include directive like this, include file equals I call it variables.jsp, and now let's say here I want to say let's have a output tag like this, and I want to say I'll just output the variable I defined in variables.jsp, which was name. And let's just save that and run it, and it's fine. There's Sue. I'll just make that a bit clearer. I'll just put a another paragraph tag in there, get everything on a different line. But if you try to do that using a JSP include, you'll find it just says that name is not defined. Because like this include directive, it's literally like getting the contents of your file that you've included and literally pasting it in here. So whereas like if you had a JSP include, then you wouldn't have that available here. The variable wouldn't be available. It would only try to include kind of this stuff at runtime, which would be no good. Like your Java wouldn't be syntactically correct in that case. If you want to reference name here in this case from here, then clearly you've literally got to define name further up, just like you would if you were writing a Java program. And for that I can use this, because this literally will take the stuff from the included file, and it's equivalent to pasting it at this point. So that's fine, except of course you can include it in multiple files, which is the point of it. It's very handy. Now sometimes there are circumstances where you must use this, and there's one that I can think of. We've already talked about choosing one or the other based on considerations of efficiency. But what about if you want to include one file? What about if you don't know which file you want to include until runtime? Like you want to include a file based on a URL parameter, let's say, for example. So let's say here, let's have a comment. So I'm going to say must use, just get rid of that, must use include tag, include JSP tag, if you don't know what file you want till runtime. So what I mean is, supposing we've got some Java code here that says string ID equals request dot get parameter ID, and now I want to include one file if there's an ID parameter and another if I don't. Let's create a couple of files, and I'll make these JSP files. They could be text files. It doesn't matter. Let's say JSP. Let's create a ID.jsp. Let's call it idfound.jsp. And in there, I'm just going to get rid of all this stuff, and I'm going to say the ID parameter was found. And let's say, yeah, that's enough actually. And then let's create another one here, and let's say JSP. As I say, this could be HTML. In fact, maybe I should make it HTML, just to demonstrate including HTML. Let's just cut that, and let's get rid of that. And just for the head of it, I'm going to actually make this, right click and go to new HTML file. I'm going to say id found.html, finish. And remember, this is just a fragment. Let's get rid of all that, and bung this in. That looks good. And now I'm going to create a new HTML, and I'm going to call it id not found.html, finish. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff again and say the ID parameter is missing, and let's get rid of that. And now, so the idea is I want to include this file if there's an ID parameter in the URL, and this file if there isn't. I can't do that with an include directive, because the include directive will literally bung those files in just as if I'd pasted them in here. So you can't use it in a conditional way. Just save that. Sometimes you get sometimes in Eclipse everything starts getting underlined like crazy, and I'm not completely sure that it's kind of telling me the truth here. So unknown tag exclamation mark, I think it's just getting confused. Okay, so let's say here, I'm going to say if ID equals null, and open a bracket there, and here I'm going to say JSP include, and page equals ID not found.html. So when this page runs, it's going to say it's going to include this file. It's going to go back to the server and get this file if the ID parameter is there, and if it isn't, sorry, if the ID parameter is not there, and if it is, let's close that if statement and say else, and then I'm going to, let's copy this, save some time. Oh yeah, I've not closed this tag, that's one thing. So, and I think that looks good. And here I'm going to say ID found.html, and then finally I'm going to close the if statement here. So again, this is a little bit messy, and you might want to think about using JSTL tags for doing a lot of this stuff, but it's very useful to know. And let's run that. So basically, if there's an ID parameter, I expect to see this page, and I expect to see this page. And if there's not an ID parameter, if ID is null, I expect to see this page. And if I run this now, then I've got some error there, expecting JSP param name and value attribute. Did I do something crazy? Yeah, I forgot to close this one as well. So you can actually include JSP param tags. You can have an opening and closing JSP include tag and put param tags in there between them that supply parameters to your included page. But I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to stick with this. So let's run this. And now you can see it says the ID parameter is missing. Actually, let's also put a paragraph here, make it a bit clearer. So p/ and close the p tag and run that. Okay, so it says the ID parameter is missing, but now if I include an ID parameter in the URL, ID equals 6, then it says the ID parameter is found because it's including this file. So let's really quickly summarize. So basically, usually if you've got content that changes a lot, use JSP include. If you've got content that doesn't change a lot, it's probably more efficient to use the include directive here. If you've got Java code that you literally want to include in your page, you're going to have to use the static include, the the include directive. Whereas if you don't know if you want to include the page at when you compile a servlet, if you want to decide which page to include at runtime, you're going to have to use the JSP include tag. So that's it for includes. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Once you practiced a little bit, you'll see it's pretty straightforward. And that's it for this tutorial. Let's clear that error. I hate seeing errors. There we go. And until next time, happy coding.